What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. Today, we're going to give a quick shout out right off the bat to 888 Vibration on YouTube, who gave me the idea for this video. Actually asked me in a comment I'm going to show right here. Says, love your channel. Can you make a video only about negative NDEs to analyze them? Thank you. And I know 888 Vibrations commented many times on many of my videos. I thought it was a really good idea. It's something that I was actually just talking about to some extent in my Exit the Cave video part 2 yesterday. That's the video that 888 Vibration was commenting on. And I mentioned some of these negative NDEs. And I thought it was a really interesting idea for a multitude of reasons, one of which I think it's interesting to people in general because we can figure out, maybe try and analyze these and see what we can learn from them. But the second thing is, I said, why not? Because when I was really into NDEs, when I first got into, you could say the new age ideals, and thinking that they explained everything, that life is a lesson, life is a school, our memories are wiped so that we can be more immersed into this experience, etc. I heard or saw occasionally little things pop up of going into a hell realm or a negative NDE and it being terrifying and not being light and love and all this stuff. And I kind of didn't want to believe that because I was just really enjoying all the positive NDEs and the great messages that I was extracting from them and how I could apply them to my life. And so I kind of stayed away from them. I'm like, well, these are few and far between. Most of the channels that I'm listening to, Next Level Soul podcast and these things, they're really just focusing on the positive ones. And so I said, okay, even if it's 10% or 15% or whatever the stats may be, and I think I've got a clip later on from somebody who studied NDEs for a lengthy period of time, not his entire life, but for a long period of time. He does talk about the exact percentage of NDEs that are quote unquote negative. But I said, okay, it's a small percentage, and I'm just going to kind of ignore it. I just didn't want to watch them. Well, so this is an opportunity for me to actually watch some of these NDEs and learn about some of the negative ones and see if I can find any patterns, or we can find any patterns together, and how it applies to kind of the paradigm that is making sense right now in terms of everything that we've been researching. So without further ado, we're going to get into some of these negative NDEs. I've gathered a couple that are video ones. I've also taken one that's written from trickbythelight.com. That's a website from Wayne Bush. Check that out, by the way. And where he's gathered a lot of different excerpts of different NDEs, written NDEs. And then we're going to end with the clip from the Danny Jones podcast of this gentleman who is an expert on NDEs. And he's going to talk about some of the negative experiences. He's going to give his interpretation. I'm going to give mine on his, and we're going to go from there. So without further ado, let's get into the mix. So first of all, we're going to start with this one, Tricked by the Light. Now, I've been looking all over the place trying to find more of these, and I haven't found any more like this. This one is really alarming because it hits exactly this theory of the soul trap, and it's pretty startling, actually. And we're going to talk about why, multiple potential possibilities as to why these are so rare to find NDEs like this, literally describing the potential soul trap. But without further ado, let's check this out. So it's from somebody named Ruth. This is from the website, I believe, NDERF.org, I think, if I'm saying that correctly. And this is also contained in Exit the Cave. This specific excerpt is in Exit the Cave. So this is what Ruth remembered. I was taken to special entities who looked like the usual gray aliens, but they had lots of wrinkles on their faces. They called themselves the Council. We've heard this as well from other NDEs. And they said they were part of a group called Soul Recyclers, helping souls to reincarnate. This was by far my most profound NDE, as I could see the silver cord that attached me to my body. Now, this is about as close as I think that I've seen in terms of actually getting to the idea from an NDE in particular to this idea of soul recycling and the purpose of that to be generating loosh. There's lots of accounts on Trick by the Light talking about the concept of reincarnation, or that souls are quote unquote recycled, but never is it mentioned, or at least not that I could find in the NDEs in particular, that there's an ulterior motive for the recycling, and it's basically just this engineered system, the simulation, and the aim of the simulation is to extract this energy from us, basically, which is loosh. And I have a theory as to why, right? Like, why is it almost not included in NDEs whatsoever, but we're hearing these accounts from remote viewers, many different remote viewers, from even like astral projections and different things like that. So my theory on this is NDEs are typically, we're seeing elements of it, but not explicitly. that NDEs are people coming out of their body by a chance occurrence, right? By effectively dying or nearly dying, and they're jettisoned out of their body. It's not people that have honed an ability to enter and exit, or exit and enter, I should say, and then are to have their faculties about them and to be able to actually like observe things and then retain that, right? When you're experiencing an NDE, it seems as though you're more at the will of the entities that are guiding you. You're more shocked, you're more thrown off. It's once again, you're not somebody who's honed these skills. You're just out there. And so I think that people that are, by the way, I've actually been unconscious. I don't know what to call it, right? Been, I guess you would call it, I had an NDE back in 2009, except for I don't remember anything. Okay, my point in mentioning that is I think that the people that are remembering elements of their NDEs, it's kind of like on purpose. The memories or whatever is acquired there, they're not erased, or they're sent back intentionally with these particular memories, probably with their motivation for you to spread that message or to talk about what you experienced. And that hopefully, I think if we're taking the perspective that it is a simulation and there's a nefarious purpose, they want certain things to be propagated that can keep the system intact. So I think that why we're seeing different narratives emerge from remote viewing and astral projection when people are willfully going out there is because they're able to extract information, they're able to retain it, and they're not subject to potentially their memories being wiped or being manipulated in the same way that people are just jettisoned out and like, oh my God, I'm shocked. What's going on? I see you. I'm going to believe whatever you're saying. Right. So this is just a theory of mine. I don't know how legitimate it is because it's just literally my logic working. And I'd love to hear people comment or love to know if there's other researchers that have talked about the differences of experiences gathered from NDEs versus intentional remote viewing. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting one. You could say it's not the most negative. It's not that we're going to hear some real negative ones where people were terrified, but it does get in this idea of soul recyclers, but again, without the nefarious motives attached to it. Okay, now we're going to get into this one. So this guy claims he quote unquote descended into hell. He was a criminal. He had a 70-year sentence. And it's actually funny, right? You see the background image, him chained up. You see like fire and negative maybe entities behind him. But to me, and again, I'm not a biblical scholar, but this does not appear to be whatsoever the quote unquote, like he's talking about hell. And then I think now he's a born again or Christian or whatever. But it's weird because it's not the hell that's described in, I think, like by traditional Christianity, mainstream Christianity, of fire and brimstone, like a place of burning, which I've talked about many times on this channel, where I actually believe Jesus was in the scriptures where he mentions how he's just talking about a dumpster where they burned trash. There's a name for it. I'm blanking on it, but that was a mistranslation into this idea of hell, an eternal place of torment. No, he was just describing a trash site where trash was burned. But anyways, it wasn't that, yet he's likening it to the Christian notion of hell, or even if you read the Quran, talk about hell over and over and over, and it's like you'll be there and you'll be there forever and you're going to be burned, and it's like that. It's not that. But anyways, so we're going to get into it, and I'm going to talk about what he's describing here in this quote unquote negative NDE. But when you really think about it, this NDE is actually it's exactly the same as so many other NDEs we hear about. It's only quote unquote hell because of the things he's looking at, basically because he led a very negative life, it appears like, and that was being focused upon to what end, for what purpose. We're going to get into that in a moment as well, but let's check this out.
There was nothing there, man. It's just rubble. Like there was nothing man-made. There's no streets, sidewalks, cars, light poles, concrete buildings, road sign. None of that was there. Nothing man-made. There was nothing growing either, though. There was no plants, no nothing. It was just like a barren kind of wasteland. And yet, off in the distance, I seen a man. And it wasn't the man in the golden suit. He was wearing like a drab type color of clothing. And he was far away, but yet I felt like he was right here. You know, he was off in the distance, but he was just staring at me. And he was staring at me the same way your dad used to stare at you when you did something real stupid. That look of just like disappointment and all that. And I didn't want to look at him. I was like, oh gosh, like he just knew, he knew everything. But I didn't, I wasn't computing. I wasn't understanding what was going on. And he didn't talk to me. He didn't wave. He didn't kick dirt at me. He didn't do nothing. He just stood there staring.
Okay. So anyway, so this is the beginning, right? He descends in this place. And I think they're talking about it as being hell. Once again, it doesn't fit this description. Also, too, you're going to see in a moment, right? The idea of hell, I think, as it's described in mainstream Christianity or other places, it's eternal. You're locked in. That's it. Obviously, that's not the case in this instant, right? He's here, and he's asked if he wants to leave. That comes later, or does he want to live, or whatever. And he also talks about experiencing "quote unquote" heaven, which I think is the artificial astral that most people go to. But again, matter of interpretation, I suppose. But anyway, so this is the beginning of it. Now he says, this is hell. This is the quote unquote hell that he experienced. But to me, this just sounds like the typical traditional life review. It's just, he had a rough life. And so he's seeing all the negative stuff he did. And he's calling this the hell or the torment, but really it's just a life review.
Because you're in darkness. And like I said, I felt like I was floating. So you can't feel nothing. There's nothing to anchor you down. There's nothing to grab onto. And so as soon as it went black, that's when it began. And it was horrible. I started to relive all the bad, wicked, evil, foul things that I ever did to another. Anytime I stole from somebody, I relived it, but I experienced the pain that it brought them.
See.
And like I said, I shot somebody. And you experienced the pain that you brought them and the pain that their family felt by watching them hurt. And I've been shot, I've been stabbed, I've been beat down. I mean, you name it, ran over, whatever. And nothing on this planet will ever, ever compare to the torments that await a non-believer.
It's interesting that it's just like he's putting it in, because obviously now I think he's Christian, right? So he's putting everything in the context of Christianity, being a non-believer. But it's interesting, the way he describes hell literally is just a reflection of the way he was like living his life, or the way he interpreted living his life. So it's not as though there's an external place that's filled with fire and brimstone, as it's normally described, where it's torturing him. It's just he's being tortured by his own mind or his own memories. So I don't see how that fits the traditional viewpoint of hell. It's literally just an NDE that everybody talks about, where you have a life review, and this is the life review. It just was an unfortunate life review. It also reminds me too of when they talk about in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I just finished reading, right? When you leave, that sometimes you can be afraid or frightened, but really it's just your own consciousness that is potentially terrifying you or worrying you. And so this kind of lines up with that as well. It's not external, hey, he's thrown into a place and just tortured. He's being tortured by his own consciousness and by his own memories. So this doesn't at all, to me, fit that idea. I'm sure it was unpleasant. I'm sure it was terrible. But when we're talking about a negative NDE or quote unquote hellish NDE, it still fits the same general structure. And I think what most people, at least in the soul trick or soul trap a line of thinking, would say there's some manipulative element to it. Positive or negative life reviews have a motive. There's a purpose behind them, an ulterior motive, not obviously for our benefit necessarily, but to manipulate us into doing something. It's usually coming back to life, which you're going to hear in one moment. Okay, so check this out, where he finally says, I want to live.
And then what seems like it went on forever, all of a sudden there was a question asked. And it was just out of nowhere. He says, do you want to live or die? That was it.
Was it that same man, Kenneth, that you were seeing? Did he ask you that question? Well, you just heard it.
I can't say that, because I didn't see anybody else. All I seen is me being stupid to other people, being sinful, we'll say, and experiencing their hurts and pains. I didn't see a guy come up and say, hey, you want to live or die, or let's make a deal, or no. It was just a voice out of nowhere. Do you want to live or die? And I had a 70-year sentence. While I was in prison, I didn't program. I didn't try to better myself. If I did have a job, it was so that I could compromise whatever position I was in. I never tried to better myself. I thought that I would die in prison. And I said, I want to live because I would rather be back in that foul, dirty, nasty cell than spend one more second up in this.
All right, so there it is. Interesting, but that fits the narrative of what we see a lot of times. And again, when you're overlaying that experience with whether it's a Christian narrative, a Muslim narrative, a Hindu narrative, whatever it may be, that's just an overlay, I think. But if I'm just saying this for people that sometimes I know get turned off from people that seem to be pushing a religion or like hardcore a narrative, or hey, this is what awaits for non-believers, that type of thing. And I get that too, but just take this as, I think, information without the overlay, without the overtones of whatever narrative or agenda he might be trying to push overtly or whatever it may be, or subconsciously. And just take it as information, because I do think it's a legitimate experience that totally meshes with NDEs from people that are religious, non-religious, whatever it may be. So anyways, there's a negative NDE, quote unquote, but it's really just a life review. So nothing crazy different there than what we've seen many times. Now, this is another one. Again, look, the hell and back, and they put the picture of Satan. That's from a movie. Actually, I've seen that movie way back in the day. I can't remember what it's called, but so, and again, like every one that I'm finding where they're talking about hell is always somebody that has some sort of Christian agenda. It is what it is. But just again, try and listen to it for the raw information without the forced overlay.
These people.
He's talking about entities in the afterlife. I mean, this just sounds like our Archon straight up. It's the void. And then also what's interesting here is when you're in the void, or they call it like the dull light, it's if I'm remembering this correctly, I think it's your own consciousness or your own awareness that is the light. And so if that is, I think, ostensibly dim or non-existent for whatever reason, because maybe you're afraid or whatever it may be, then that may be where you feel like you're in pure darkness. Again, different from, I mean, these are all different from the traditional mainstream narratives of how hell is described in different texts as fire and brimstone, or a place of burning, or place of eternal torture. I'm just pointing this out. Everybody's so quick to call it, just because it's unpleasant, they're calling it hell. And then that also adds on the connotations that it's an eternal place and you're locked in there forever. But now these are obviously two accounts right here where they experienced it and they left. So I don't really see the connection to calling it hell, but yeah, these are unpleasant, let's say, at least NDEs.
And
So I had a couple thoughts about this, right? He said it's the creature wanting to play God, and it's like dominate or be dominated. But it's funny that idea, what he's talking about, because basically he's saying to submit effectively. And I never really thought about this before entering into all this information, talking to Tony Sayers and reading these books, Exit the Cave, listening to Jason Giorgiani. But it's funny because this what he's saying right here goes against the whole movement of sovereign spirits, of basically claiming your authority, claiming your sovereignty, and not looking up to like a savior figure. So that's kind of an interesting takeaway from, well, more of this story, but more it's about the interpretation of the story. And I think, I don't know too much about this guy who's being interviewed here, but he clearly feels like he's really, if you listen to more of the clips, he's just pushing a bit of a Christian narrative or a Christian agenda. I don't know why. I don't know. I always find it fascinating that I think it's hard for people to just sort of interpret everything, but I do notice that when they're trying to a lot of these people, when they're trying to, and look, maybe we all have our own biases, okay? I'm not perfect in this respect either. I think none of us are. So I'm sure there's ways that my own biases or preconceived notions will get in the way of my reasoning and logic or whatnot. But it does always seem, I think it just a little bothersome to me sometimes when everything is extracted and then they attempted to just fit right into this one particular paradigm that they're just clinging to from this one, mainstream ideals of Christianity. Because sure, you can frame this particular experience in that way, but then what about all the data from remote viewers, from astral projections, from the existence of ETs? Like, how does all that stuff fit into this one? Just expand the paradigm, or just take these bits and pieces from the Christian narrative that may have a lot of value and merit, but then be open to having some of the other things be modified, and just look at everything as a buffet of knowledge, and then use our discernment, right? Something we keep talking about more and more, the importance of discernment, to use our discernment to then kind of pick through things and try and figure out what's true and what's not, as opposed to just having to buy into one ideology 100%, 0 to nothing, right? Or so what is it? All or nothing, excuse me. And you just have to buy into all of it, and then you have to back engineer the rationale for all the pieces that don't fit together so nicely. You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to, let's just all absorb things. There's probably good stuff scattered around through many of these different religions or religious texts, and then we got to use our discernment or logic to varying degrees to piece it all together. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, but this is another negative NDE that I think is fascinating, going against that sovereignty idea. And then what would be the purpose of, if we think about this from the perspective of why this information is being sent back so it can be relayed? I don't know. I guess it would be, again, pushing this idea. I feel like the idea of hell or a negative place or being beat up or tortured or whatever, it has its place in making people once again afraid and fall in line. And then also too, when you pass on, if you think about it, if now there's this fear that you could go to this really negative place, but then you don't, you go to this beautiful place, you go to what we're calling the artificial astral, where you're greeted by the false entities that sort of are love and light, and they love bomb you. You're like, oh my God, I made it. I didn't go to this negative place. And then you're more susceptible. This is just a theory. You're more susceptible to whatever manipulation is then being showed to you, when they're trying to persuade you to go back and reincarnate, because you're like, all right, well, I made it to the good spot. This has got to be it, right? So I could see that as being one of the reasons why these negative experiences will happen, and they're allowed to come back and retell it as is. Just a thought. Okay, now we're going to get to the final clip here. This is a near-death experience researcher on the Danny Jones podcast talking about hellish near-death experiences. He gives his interpretation. I'm going to start. This is a lengthy clip, about like 5 minutes, but I'm going to break it up at different points, because I think I don't know this gentleman's background in terms of if he has any religious leanings. I feel like he doesn't, because I just didn't get that vibe from him that he's trying to like push Islam or Christianity or whatever it may be. But I am going to chime in, because I do think he weighs in with a lot of very liberal interpretation in terms of the things that he's documented. And I'm going to kind of chime in as I feel is needed to kind of give my perspective on maybe how he might be, I don't know, coloring the narrative a bit too much.
Never described like a terrifying experience, like hell?
Yeah, there's a very, very small percentage of near-death experiences in which they either are aware of, visualize a hellish realm during their near-death experience, or are actually a part of it, impacted, in other words, are actually in that hellish realm. So, first of all, these are very, very unusual. Second of all, I want to say I've done a lot of writing on this, and at this point, I want to say that that's sort of the final frontier of my near-death experience research. I'm still actively looking at that, but as best I can tell at this point in time, there's a couple caveats to these awareness or actually being impacted personally by these hellish experiences. Number one, I don't believe that in near-death experiences there's a shred of evidence that we, you, me, anybody is at risk for a permanent being condemned to some permanent involuntary hellish realm.
I'd love to know more about this, but again, this just goes in line with many videos that I've made on this channel, that the idea of an eternal place of torment is absolutely absurd, illogical, nonsensical. People don't, I think, understand what eternity means, what infinity means, especially if you're not inclined mathematically and you've studied different things involving the limit as X approaches infinity or things like that. What does that really mean to get your head around infinity? You can't really, you think you might know, but you can't really know. And I think Paul Wallace said it best. The concept of hell, again, from the standpoint of Christianity, I'm not talking about purgatory, but I'm talking about hell or Islam or whatever, is mathematically absurd. And especially these are also, they're claiming that in these religions that you're going there for eternity for what? For 80 years, when we already know, we already are. Let's not even go to let's say the universe is billions of years old. Forget that. What if it's even multiple thousands of years old? Even if you want to play that game, okay, 80 or 90 years of a purportedly singular life, and then you're just chucked away for eternity, and you're not even like in a void. You're being actively tortured or burned for that entire time. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. What crime could exist on this planet that would be worthy of infinite torture? And that's like the entire purpose of your life, that you just can't escape. Like, come on, that's just a ridiculous thing. But anyways, yeah, so he's saying that I don't even need an NDE to come to that conclusion. That just defies the logic of any person, entity, creator, whatever it may be, to create a place of eternal torment. Like that's just absolutely wild to me that even has, that idea has existed as long as it has, and people have bought into it or been afraid by it. But yeah, so anyways, he discounts that right off the bat. That makes perfect sense to me.
That is absolutely unknown, and that's over 4,000 near-death experiences, my own and other credible researchers that have published on that. So what's going on? Well, as best I can tell, and this is again from talking to my own research and other near-death experiencers that have had profoundly deep experiences, what I think is going on is that these are people that are in the afterlife that somewhat like some earthly people. They simply make a series of, and typically it's multiple, sequential, very poor decisions that ultimately end up with them being there. I mean, these are people that even in the afterlife may retain so much hatred, anger, resentment to other people that they are literally comfortable being with others that have those values in the afterlife. In other words, this paradoxically is, for the people in those hellish realms, their heaven, because that's where they want to be. They choose to be there. They choose to be there because others are there that are like them. And that's what they want to do.
It's very interesting. So obviously this is all a matter of interpretation. He even said, I think in his opinion, but I think this gentleman must be falling into that same mindset of a lot of the love and light and new age stuff, where the heavenly realm, quote unquote, is really the heavenly realm, that astral plane that is presented as such is truly what it is. Whereas an alternative interpretation, and again, I'm not saying which one is right or wrong, but this is just an alternative interpretation based on a lot of the information that I've been learning about as of late, right? With the idea of the soul trap, soul trick. Instead, perhaps what it is these are the entities that know what's up, and they are refusing to go into this like artificial AI generated, whatever you want to call it, astral realm that has the appearance of that appears to be heavenly, where you are, it looks as though you're being greeted by these heavenly figures, but perhaps they figure that out and they're refusing to go. They are instead residing in some maybe middle ground, or he's interpreting this as a hellish area, but instead it's just that they're not going back into the astral plane to then be convinced or manipulated into reincarnating again. So I mean, like I said, this is just my thought or my idea as an alternative narrative, because this is just a matter of perspective. But this is how he's framing it. So I have to believe that he has not been informed whatsoever these alternative theories of the idea of the soul trap from remote viewers or other places where this data has been gathered, and therefore he's in that love and light, still on that love and light train, that everything is a school, it's a lesson, etc.
One important caveat also of seeing people in these hellish realms is that some of the strongest line of evidence that even in the afterlife, free will predominates. Here on earth, we can choose, but if you can choose in an afterlife to be a party that, to literally involve yourself in those hellish realms with other beings, that's some of the strongest evidence I can think of that you can choose as a being, as a spirit, even in the afterlife. And I want to also emphasize that many near-death experiencers say there cannot possibly be hell in that heaven or in that afterlife, and they're correct. And I'll explain that. When they are aware of or observe these type of hellish realms, they're almost always sequestered. They are separated from the rest of the heavenly realms. In other words, they're all in a particular place, and the hellish beings don't directly impact, harm, interact with literally those other people that are virtually all other spirits in the heavenly realm. So that's another important caveat. But I'm still, again, I want to emphasize, I'm still actively investigating that, and stay tuned.
Okay.
So those are some of my preliminary thoughts that I have about that seeming paradox of a universe overwhelmingly described as loving and compassionate in the afterlife, and yet here are these hellish beings. I want to also say many.
By the way, I'm curious to know what he means by hellish beings. Is he talking about entities coming in and bothering them, or is he just saying these are the collection of, like, what does he mean hellish beings? Or are these just a collection of souls or spirits that have chosen not to go into that astral plane? I'd love to know a little bit more what he means when he calls them hellish beings.
People that are aware of or in these hellish realms have a sense that even in the people in the throes of this hell, again, one reason they've chosen to be there, backing up a little bit, is that in the afterlife, in heaven, there seems to be a sense that you're known for who you are, what you are, everything you are. So you can understand it from the perspective of these hellish demonic beings. If they were to be among other spiritual beings in heaven, they would be immediately known instantaneously for being the evil, antisocial beings that they really are. And you can just imagine how they would be reluctant to do that. And so that helps explain why they tend to congregate together. So there's that perspective too. But many of the people that have had these hellish near-death experiences have the sense that all they ever had to do in this hellish realm was to, out of free will, request to leave, want to leave, sincerely desire to leave, and that they could return back to the typical heavenly realm. So again, back to that great caveat, me and other near-death experience researchers looking in this, I don't know that hardly any of us believe that we're at risk for a permanent, involuntary, hellish existence in the afterlife, and that's important.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Again, he's talking about people that have been to the realm. So is he lumping the actual just people that have gone there as they're the demonic ones, or is he saying there's other beings that are already there? They're not demonic. Anyways, I'm not exactly sure. I'd love to know more, to hear more from these individuals who went there, maybe what some of the things that have been happening in their lives. The more I'm thinking about it too, when that other gentleman was talking before, I wonder if this is more of a common occurrence for people that, for example, right? Like, let's say people who have had a particularly negative time on this planet, and they know that, and let's say the people managing the system, they know that hey, you've been a lifelong criminal. You know that you've hurt a lot of people and you're aware of that. We're going to play on that. We're going to manipulate that. You're kind of expecting that you're going to go to a hellish place. We're going to send you to this place and it's going to have more of an effect on you because this is what your expectations may be, and it's going to be more believable. I don't know. It's these literally just a random theory that it's just popping in my head right now because I'm looking at it from the perspective of how I think a lot of these experiences are used as manipulations. I mean, why else? I think if, again, through this lens, why else would you be retaining these memories if it were not for an explicit purpose for the preservation and maintenance of the system? So it could be a case-by-case thing. And again, we go back to this idea that a lot of these NDEs are tailor-made for individuals. We're also talking about family members or religious figures, depending on your particular faith. Religious persuasion, you may see Buddha, you may see somebody from the Islamic faith, from the Christian faith, depending on where you sit in that religious spectrum. So this could be, again, part of that same idea. It's a manipulation for some, like, it wouldn't make sense if you feel as though you've lived an amazing life and then you're thrown in there. That could be confusing. Like, wait a minute, I thought I did everything right. I had faith, I did all the stuff that you felt like those were the keys, right? So that maybe would cause somebody to question what's happening. So I don't know. Again, these are just a whole lot of speculations, a whole lot of theories, but I do think this was a fascinating topic to cover, to look at some of these quote unquote hellish NDEs or negative experiences and try and see if I could glean whatever possible I could in terms of the information presented therein. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What are your guys' interpretation of these negative NDEs? And then how does that jive with the positive NDEs? We're getting a lot of messaging of people saying it's love, it's light, it's a school, we're just meant to learn, where I think a lot of folks in our community feel as though that's basically pushing an idea of being passive, of just saying, hey, this is all part of the plan, it's all good, and not pushing back or not wanting to escape, right? So we could see that agenda being served with those NDEs. What about the negative ones though? So like, do you think it's also just to add a different nuance, maybe for different individuals, where that narrative would resonate with them, but it would also kind of serve an overall general purpose of maintaining the structure and the nature of the system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope you guys found this to be interesting, but also insightful. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy.